Hi, good morning. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Carlota. I'm a nurse and a nurse director at the Sexual Health Clinics of New York City. Um, and so I'm speaking today with Julian, and together we are part of an organization called the People's Collective that we started on our own. And the People's Collective is sort of a clinic that we're hoping we can start one day that's more about raising consciousness in the community, but also raising consciousness to a lot of the issues that intersect the New York City
Thank you.
community, especially queers and peoples of color. Um, uh,
Hello,
Sorry, just checking
everyone.
if Julian's off the
Oh,
call.
sorry. Uh, I'm actually at work right now. My name is Julian Watkins. I'm a physician. I also work at the New York City Department of Health. I work closely with Carlota in the pre-coronavirus world. Currently, I am working as part of the Incident Command Center for the City of New York for the COVID response. We're revving up for the contact tracing phase of this. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but I just want to start out by saying yes, we are representing the People's Clinic today. We're not representing the City of New York. So the things that we talk about and in the opinions expressed are ours and ours alone. Well, hopefully not ours alone. Hopefully you guys will join in and share some of these opinions or share your opinions and start the discourse. So I'll let Carlota begin. We're just gonna give a little bit of background of who we are. Well, I'll just do it. So we started at the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak in the city, when it was really apparent that in the work that we do normally in the sexual health clinics, we know that certain groups of people and certain populations are at high risk or are left at high risk. And so we knew that very early in the response that we needed to get information out to people regarding this thing in an accessible way to talk. And also, so it's about information spreading, but it's also about idea spreading and getting people to kind of see exactly where we are. you know um, it was a few months into this outbreak that a lot of data started to come in that kind of confirmed what our initial fears were, that certain communities, particularly poor communities, communities of color, immigrant communities, would be affected and bear the brunt of this outbreak. And we see that our fears have come to pass. And I find no pleasure in having my fears affirmed, but I think it just highlights what the next step should be and what we all should be thinking about as this goes on, because nothing that's happened should be surprising to anyone. The world that we lived in before the coronavirus is the world that produced these outcomes. It's the world that produced the outcomes that, or the situations that set all these communities up and left them vulnerable. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can all raise our consciousness and consider some things and try to really see the world for what it is instead of what we want it to be. And that way we can actually talk about the real issues at hand and not just, you know, surface issues or these talking points that we may see or hear on the radio. If we're talking about the issues directly and we think about how it affects our lives and other people, we'll see that the change that's required isn't, oh, I want to vote for someone or I want to join a political party. It becomes this personal mission where you understand and you see these issues as vital to you in your life and to the communities that we live in and the people that we share about and for our collective humanity. Carlota, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think just to reiterate what Julian said, that these views are just ours and we're representing the People's Clinic. But also what a lot of this pandemic has shown me, and I think shown America, is that how unequal the system was. So this we had rampant inequality prior to COVID, but we're just seeing how important, how inequality is playing out when it comes to COVID. So for example, I think New York City was just the perfect place for COVID to hit because it's such an unequal city. And we also just have completely different standards of living for all different of our inhabitants. And so I think one thing I've been thinking about a lot when it comes to raising consciousness, um, is like, how are we gonna look in the future? Like, or for the future generations, are we gonna be able to say like we were able to realize like how blind we were, or are we not gonna be? Are we just gonna be able to say we made a difference or not?
Yeah.
And so that's just like really something I've been thinking about. And I think a lot of these things that we look for or we're looking for, we're not finding in our lawmakers. We're not finding in like the communities or the structures around us. We're not finding in the corporations that we work for, and so that we have to sort of create these new structures that we would want to see,
Yeah.
and that we want
I
for the future.
Yeah. I think it's this thing where, growing up, I grew up in the South. I grew up in, my background, my father's African American. My mother is from the Republic of Panama in Central America. And it's a thing growing up in, in an, with an immigrant background or an African American background, where we always talk about the past and we talk about how bad things were. And we can look at the past with a clear vision and kind of see what was going on at that moment, what were all the pieces that were at play, and we can look back at that past and say, if I was back then, if I was in slavery, or if I was in the time of the civil rights movement and segregation, where we always, a lot of us will say, well, I wouldn't stand for that, or I wouldn't, I couldn't be a slave because I wouldn't take that crap line down, or they would have, I would be fighting. But what we all need to realize is that those moments back, like the people who were living back then, they were living in normal times. Everyone understood that what the environments that were set up, those were the norm. And so what we need to look at, and looking back, hindsight is 2020, but there's a way to kind of see the world that we live in right now through 2020 vision, and seeing that what's going on in the world around us at this moment is just as extreme, or is a modern 2020 version of an extreme, that when we do look back at this in 5 years, in 10 years, in 30 years, the question that we should all be asking ourselves is, what did we do during that time? You know? And Carlota talked about it. Like, will we be proud of how we acted when there was a global pandemic where in the city of New York, hundreds of people were dying a day, up to 800, 900, 1,000 people a day? What were we doing when in America, almost 100,000 people have died from this thing? What were we doing when governments were reopening and putting people's lives at risk and doing things, legislating things to force people out into a world where you can die? Like, what were we doing? And so I think that process, you can come to it passively, and you can, sometimes it takes living the experience and like seeing a loved one die, or losing your job, or just going through a tragedy, and then you can understand, damn, all of these things came to play and it affected my life. But there's a way to kind of look at all the factors going on and raise your consciousness to move to see things a little bit more clearly. And so we'll just talk about it a little bit more. um so there's, in looking into our past to help us, see things more clearly. One thing that really stood out to me was a lot of the liberation movements in our past. And, thinking back to the civil rights movement, we look for the women's liberation movement, the feminist movement, we look to the queer liberation movement. A lot of what was happening in those movements, people were raising a collective consciousness. People were getting fed up. They were fed up with the status quo. People were talking about it. People were spreading ideas, people were joining movements, people were getting things going. And it's our theory and opinion that this is what should be happening now, because that's how you build revolution, and that's how you spark change, and that's how you can get a collective consciousness raised. I'll let you, if you want to hop on or say anything, Carlota.
Yeah, like Julia and I were talking a lot about consciousness raising, and like one thing that I think has just like been shown is that like we need each other. We exist to coexist. That we like need each other in this world in order to survive. And like and maybe it's not super present in a lot of people's mind, but this pandemic has shown that like if like you could easily spread this to your neighbor, and that could affect their lives and the lives of their families. And so I think that this individuality that America espouses is very false because we do need each other to survive.
Yeah.
Um, and I think a lot of like what's in order for us to come out of this like a stronger, more resilient, and maybe a more conscious individuals is like we also have to like be aware of like our privilege and how that plays into a lot of this and our intersectionality as well. You know, like
Yeah.
Julian talked a little bit about his like own experience, and I think it's really important to share these experiences and for all of us to share our experiences because we're all connected in many ways and we are all intersectional in many ways, and so maybe a lot of people don't feel that way, but like you are intersectional, you are connected to so many other communities, um,
Yeah.
and so
I
I
think
think yeah.
no, go ahead. No, I was just saying, like, when we talk about consciousness raising, there was this in the feminist movement where there was a time where women were, you know, housewives. They weren't allowed to talk about things. They weren't allowed to share their thoughts and dreams. They were encouraged and socialized to be quiet and to feel isolated and feel disconnected from others. But when the feminist movement in an effort to raise people's consciousness and understand that you're not in it alone, they did this thing where they started to organize groups where where these women would come together with their groups of friends, and they would discuss topics, and they would discuss them not from a theoretical view, but they would actually talk about these things and talk about how they affected their lives. So they would talk about money, and they talk about their relationship to money and you know, what, how money is affecting their lives. What's their access to money? People who come from, a one income household, or, you'll talk about like earning wages, how women were able to discuss and talk about how they were making less money than their male counterparts. And then they started to see that this is happening all over the place, that everyone is feeling the same way that I feel and is experiencing similar things. And then once you're able to talk about it and see that, oh, wait, we are all in this together, then you can kind of organize and figure out, wait, so how do we stop this? I think a big thing that stops a lot of our progression into kind of like getting into movements is that we don't see our place in it. We'll see, some of us may come from a position where we may have a little bit more privilege and we feel out of place, and that like, oh, I don't, do I fit in this? And, I say this to everyone that I can, and this is like a mantra, like, you don't have to be a black male to understand that police brutality is wrong. You don't have to be a woman to understand that women should get paid for the work that they do. You don't have to be a woman or a woman identified person or to understand that access to birth control should be a right, to access, the access to family planning and contraception and just healthcare in general should be a right. And I think that if we look at these things and we see what are the bigger issues, what is the central thing that's oppressing us? And it's like this power structure that doesn't view any of us as fully worthy or fully as valuable as some people. And when we can all see that, we can all see that we're all being oppressed by the same thing, you know, and that we all have more in common with each other than we have with this oppressor or this oppressive force that's over us. And when we can get rid of all the little details and get down to the nitty gritty and see what truly is going on, then we can all be united against that thing. The writer James Baldwin uses this metaphor, um, where he talks about growing up in America, black kid in America. One second. Um, and he talks about cowboys and Indians. And, like growing up, he identified with the cowboys. And, you're rooting for the cowboys, and you see how the cowboys are treating these Indians and they're pillaging and plundering them. But as he grew up and he became more conscious in the situation, he realized in this equation that he's not the cowboy, he's the Indian. And all of us who are being oppressed by this system, this patriarchal system that's capitalist and white supremacist, when we all realize that we're all the Indians in this scenario, we just come from different tribes. We just look different. We may speak different languages. We may love different. We may have different gender expressions, but we're all being oppressed by this same thing. And then we can all say, look, what's good for me and what's good for my tribe is good for the other tribe. And all of our tribes can be together as this, the human race.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of like what I'm just thinking from like listening to you, Julie, and like from our talks is that like like what people need to imagine is like how we can create communities that share compassion, creativity, but also like consciousness,
Yeah.
right? And so we need to not only like have communities of mutual aid and like have communities that level the playing field so that we can, we can flatten the curve, but we also need to like also help each other like raise our consciousness. So like what can we do even in small ways, like it does, I think, get a little overwhelming to think about like how as a lot of I feel like a lot of Americans should raise their consciousness, or I think we could all benefit from raising our consciousness, but even in like small ways, even if you just interact with your immediate circle, have a
Yeah.
small consciousness like raising group, or even just doing some reading. Like I think whatever small ways that someone can take as an individual to raise their consciousness
Yeah.
is just really, really important. I think having communities and having friendships like where you can share and be open about these things and
Yeah.
learn about them is really, really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. It's about leaning into that discomfort that, that the way that we've been socialized in this system has set us up. This discomfort that we all have, that we feel about talking about some issues that may be like taboo or that we may feel uncomfortable about, by not addressing them and thinking about them, we actually aren't working to dismantle some of them. So I think a good thing is just literally just talking about, race, I think is an example that a lot of, as like a topic that some people feel uncomfortable and some people shy away from it. And I think that we can all say that shying away from it and not taking action and not being, okay, here's an example. You're a good person, you see what's on TV, and you see, these people are being beaten up. Their heads are being cracked by the NYPD, and that is wrong. It's not enough just to acknowledge that. You have to it's not enough to say it's wrong and think that it's wrong. You should be what can we do to be anti-racist? What can we do to actually stop what is going on, which is wrong? We have to like, what is the practical part? What is the what makes this political personal to us? How do we actually live and exist in this world and actually, you know, practice these values and these things that we believe and think, if we're lovers of justice and freedom and we want liberation for people, we have to understand that if we're fighting for the liberation of our groups or, people or a cause that we think, then we have to make sure that what we're not doing is, passively or actively oppressing another group. We have to make sure that if we're going to fight for the liberation of women and we think that that's an issue, we have to also see like if it's time to call out bullshit for the oppression of trans people, then we have to do it because if we're lovers of justice and liberty and right, then you got to call it out even if it's not even if it doesn't hit as close to home. But if you kind of have these values and you lead with these values and you make this, and you have that as your politic, then you see the world differently. You don't see it as like, I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative or I'm a Democrat. You see it as like, I am a person who practices love. I'm a person who practices justice. I'm a person who sees the world through those lenses, and I call out bullshit when I need to, and talking about the issues and getting down to what is at the core of it, doing it with your friends in a non-judgmental environment, and getting down and just seeing how it applies to your life. That's how you can really understand it. And that's why I think that it's a time to encourage these types of things, these types of conversations. It's not just about fun and games with friends. We're all in this together, and all of our friends are part of this little world that we live in. But the big world is nothing but the sum total of all these little worlds. So it starts with the change that we can affect in our world and in our circle, and talking about the things and not avoiding things and having difficult conversations, and elevating our own personal discourse. Yeah.
There's much I can add on to that. But besides just like thinking about community, one thing like that really just came to me is like we all have our blind spots. Like I'm not without my blind spots, and individuals are not without their blind spots. And I think what makes us stronger is coming together in communities, because there are
Yeah.
people that who will be able to help you with these blind spots, or who will be able to like possibly like help you realize that that was a blind spot to work on it, but also
Yeah.
like do it in a non-shameful like community based way. I
Yeah.
think is gonna help us reach where we need to go.
Yeah. And I think if people just want to get involved or just want to do more and see more, I think it all starts with, reading and reading the writings of people who may not be on the New York Times bestseller right now, but reading from a variety of life experience, reading someone like Bell Hooks, to kind of read about all about love, to read about feminism in a way that's not the mainstream, how it's presented in the mainstream, but like a feminism that's inclusive of various experiences, inclusive of poor women, that's inclusive of third world women, that's inclusive of women who don't speak English, and seeing the world in that way and understanding how all of these factors come to play. You know, just reading the works of Audre Lorde, and how in talking about the different aspects of our lives and how they can all come into play. Reading the works of Kimberly Crenshaw, talking about intersectionality, is doing the work that we got to do, and just understanding that the culture and society, they're not going to give it to us. You have to have this thirst of knowledge, and you have to go look for it yourself. Um, and just really, if you don't understand how some of these things come into play, have that intellectual curiosity and talk about it with your friends. Maybe your friend has a better understanding, or maybe they don't know either. Maybe you guys need to start a book club. But I think it doesn't hurt to have open and honest conversations with people. And it starts with having an open and honest conversation with yourself. And then once you do that, you can work from there. Talk to your best friend and say, hey, you know what? I don't understand some of these things. And I just really want to do better, and I want to know more, and I want to be a positive person or a positive force in the world. And like starting small, you know, the People's Clinic came, we started it out of a need that we felt. And I think we're just going to just keep going with it, having the discourse, talking about things, and not just, retweeting a thing or reposting a thing, but like when you see something that's going on and you see how everything came to play itself out in in this COVID thing, and you see how, the wealth inequalities, and you see how some wealthy neighborhoods people just evacuated, and some neighborhoods don't have zero deaths or felt zero effects from this thing. But then you look at neighborhoods that have certain demographics, poor people, the same communities that we're always talking about. Those neighborhoods were ravaged by this thing. Seeing how those things come, how all those things come into play, and then just saying like, what is this? Why is it that every pandemic or every epidemic or everything that happens has happened to the same communities? The HIV epidemic, same communities. We look at it, we look at this COVID thing, and everyone's, oh, this is unveiled all these inequalities. The inequalities have already been unveiled. We just haven't even looked at it. I guess we consider it as a force of nature. I don't know, but I think it's about waking up and saying, wait, what is actually going on in this moment? These are such dire times. Like when we look back at this in 20 years, we're gonna be like, wow, we were in the middle of a goddamn pandemic, and 40 40,000 people died in New York State, and our president did absolutely nothing. He was on a disinformation campaign. He was he was passing legislation that literally only sent aid and relief to mostly businesses. We have people who've been unemployed but are just getting their unemployment like in May, and then they're already talking about cutting unemployment or cutting benefits to groups, or not helping out small businesses. So it's just about, we just got to start from somewhere. So I encourage everyone to really just take the time to really think about what's going on, and try to get some clarity, and see it for what it truly is, and see ourselves, and see how we fit into this. And I think I think that this festival is a great opportunity, and it just shows that you can come. It can come, one person or a few people can have an idea and want to put good out in the world, and want to give something to people, and want to be positive, and you can organize and do something really nice, and you can actually support an organization that's doing good. And we can all do that. Imagine a world where everyone had their own little project, like, oh, what's your project? And someone's like, oh, I want to like read to little kids in the library, and someone else is making masks, and someone else is feeding people. And imagine how beautiful that would be if we all could just do something, because I think we all could. You don't have to be working at the Department of Health, or be a nurse or a doctor to do good, or you don't have to. You can find a way to like put positive out there. I think just have to find what is the positive that you can contribute. I think that we're gonna wrap up soon, but we hope that everyone has a really great time on the for the rest of the day, and not to be super super heavy and everything, and just like take a be in the moment and actually enjoy what we the real the good things in life. It's a beautiful day. If you're gonna go out, get some sun, socially distanced, don't wear your mask, but like go out and just take take account of the positives that we have in our lives, because we do have a lot of positives. And you don't have to compare yourself to others to think, like, oh, like it could be worse. I could be, that you don't have to do that. You can just literally just look at your own life and say, what are the good things in my life? Who are the people who I love? What are the things that I enjoy? And just, you can just take a moment and just look at that and just say, wow, you know, I love my life. And if you do feel love, then like feel that love, feel it all the way through and think about that love. And that way you can kind of like take that love, and then you can spread that love to other people, and you can practice just living a life led by love, and caring and understanding, and not feel so isolated, and see that we're all people and we're all connected. Um, I think that's basically it. So we'll pass it on to Alex and Keenan and anyone else. You can follow us at the People's Clinic NYC on Instagram. Come on and follow. I'm pretty busy with this COVID thing, but we'll try to keep things updated, and writing and talking about stuff. And I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to talk later. So, you have anything else to add,
No, I just wanted
Carlota?
to say,
Okay.
like what Julian said, like it's a good time to like build a better relationship with those you love, but also like build a better relationship with yourself,
Yeah.
so you can help spread that love.
Yeah. So peace, love, and good health to everyone out there. Enjoy your day. Love the shirt, Alex. Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you as
All right,
well.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.